I've been working as a light artist for a little bit longer than I've been working as a musician. So the first light piece I made, I was 17 years old. And in fact, though it was a very simple piece, it actually contained many of the ideas that all of my later musical and visual work has contained. And I guess the primary idea is the idea of generating variety and change through combination of elements, continuous recombination of elements. Now, in music, I did that with my ambient records, music for airports and so on, really very simple initial materials which are allowed to recombine and cluster in unpredictable ways, so that the final output is a continuous stream of changing material. So this puts you in a rather different position as a composer, because you can't possibly have a conception of the finished piece in your head. All you can do is start the piece. And one of the things I should talk about on Sunday evening is the idea of this new view of the artist as somebody who starts something rather than somebody who finishes something. So this really is an exact parallel to the kind of music that I've been doing. They develop together, they're not synchronized, but they come from the same place philosophically. What happens with this piece that you've seen here is that basic banks of images are chosen from randomly, and then they're layered on top of one another. That's the simplest way of stating what happens. So there are 3 computers running there. Each one has 4 screens as its output. And each computer is running the same piece of software and randomly choosing from all of the images that it has in its bank, which is not that many actually. There are about 400 images in 2 of the computers and about 60 in the third one. So there aren't many initial primitives, we call them, but the number of combinations that can make is 77 million per computer, which of course means that the real title of this show should be 77 million cubed. Mm-hmm. We've got 3 computers. But that number would be so long that I'm afraid this museum isn't big enough for a number like that. Have to extend the front of the museum. So in very brief terms, that's how the piece works. It's to do with combinations, and it's to do with the idea of this thing that I call generative. I came up with this idea, generative art, 20 years ago. It wasn't an original idea. A lot of other people had been working in a similar form, but I gave it a name, as I gave ambient a name. So giving something a name is, in a funny way, a way of making it real, making it distinct. When you name something, you sort of create it as well. By generative, what I mean is some kind of systems approach to making art, where essentially what you're doing is creating a kind of conceptual machine which then keeps producing stuff. Now, the success of this for me is that I still sit in these shows for hours on end because I'm as surprised by the results as anybody else is. So of course I know all the original images. I made all the original images, many of them by hand, drawn at a very small scale. But I don't know the combinations. And in fact, I've never seen the same combination twice. And I must have watched this stuff for many thousands of hours now. So I'm kind of fascinated by the power of combinatorial mathematics, and slightly worried that painters might come here and leave with their head in their hands as they watch more paintings than they could do in a lifetime go past in half an hour. It's probably slightly discouraging for them. However, the advantage they have is that theirs stay, mine disappear. Once it's passed, you won't see it again. So there's a slightly sad note in the whole thing as well. My feeling about why this work exists, why it's worth doing it, is because I think it takes, certainly it takes my mind, and apparently it seems to take other people's minds, to a place that it doesn't normally go in the kind of life that we live at the moment. It's slightly religious, perhaps. You know, it's not dissimilar to the feeling I was having last weekend when I was sitting in Ely Cathedral in Lincolnshire, in England. Enormous cathedral with the most beautiful stained glass windows, and a place where people come and sit still. Probably some of them are praying, but I would imagine quite a lot of them aren't. They're just enjoying a place where you can be in a space and surrender to it. And the idea of surrender is a big part of this for me. The idea of making something which says to you, allow yourself to be out of control. Just go with it for a while. I like that feeling. I think it's a primary human urge to have that feeling. That's, I believe, why we have sex, drugs, rock and roll, and religion. Because we like surrendering. And so I see this as a way of giving people a beautiful place to surrender in. There was a rather snotty review in the LA Times by an art critic, Bagel, is that his name? Pagel, David Pagel, yes. Sorry. I mean, it's a typical, it's the kind of review I do sometimes get from art critics. And I was thinking about this last night, and what I think is the sort of misapprehension there. I was saying to Chris this morning, it's a little bit like a guy comes along and he builds a bridge and it connects the mainland where everyone lives to a very pretty island where they all like going, and everyone uses the bridge and they love going to the island and has a great time. And it's a big success. Then an architecture critic comes along and he looks at the bridge and he says, there's nothing very original about this bridge. I know many bridges that are much more interesting than this. But he doesn't look at what the bridge is doing. I'm not really concerned where this stuff fits in the story of art history, however that happens to be told at the moment. But I am concerned about making something that is of use to people, actually, of some kind of spiritual, even therapeutic use to people.